Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The rain struck my windows like gravel thrown by a restless hand, each hit shivering the panes in their old wooden frames. I kept the lamps low in the brick coach loft I called home, a narrow place tucked behind a row house in Charleston's Harleston village, where vines climbed the alley wall and the neighbors' wind chimes sounded like a pocket of silver coins. The storm did most of the talking. My phone lay face down on the table beside the sagging armchair. When it buzzed, it didn't startle me. I'd been expecting the small ordinary intrusions reminder spam silence, pretending to be company. The screen showed a voice memo from Lucas. For a ridiculous half-second, I thought he'd finally remembered to ask if I needed anything the way sons do in commercials for greeting cards and insurance policies. I pressed play. His voice rose out of the speaker with that steady, practiced confidence I had helped build from spelling lists and science fairs and piano recitals in borrowed shoes. She's needy, he said, not angry, not even tired, simply certain, always inserting herself. It's exhausting. Another voice, lighter and lower, drifted in from wherever he was calling Serena. My daughter-in-law did not need to be sharp to draw blood. Breathy agreement will do it. Once the line of credit is approved, Lucas continued, we can start taking things off her plate. She won't feel a thing. Clean. No scenes. I paused the message on the word clean. Clean like swept rooms and emptied shelves. Clean like a name erased where it used to belong. The storm changed pitch rain, loosening into a softer battering, as if even the sky had decided to catch its breath. I pressed play again and let the rest run until the memo clicked to a stop. The room resumed its small hums, the refrigerator's tired motor, the rain gutter ticking. My hands did not shake. That was the first surprise. I had believed all this time that whatever last insult came would finally unmoor me. Instead, I felt the anchored clarity of someone who has inched backward from the cliff until her heels find grass again. I stood and crossed to the window. Streetlight and storm turned the glass to a slow theater reflections of my own face veined with moving water shadows of the crepe myrtle, a bicycle left under the stairs with one petal missing. On the narrow shelf by the door, a porcelain bowl held a key I had kept for years. Lucas's copy for emergencies, a tidy word, we stretched to fit every convenience. I lifted the key and watched the bowl reclaim its round, empty sound. The key slid into the back of a drawer, and the drawer closed with the small finality of an eraser used to the pink nub. The suitcase lived where most widows keep such things, top shelf of the closet behind winter coats that still remembered a taller man's shoulders. I tugged it down. Zip teeth flashed along the bedspread. The bag lay open like a dark mouth waiting. My hands hovered over it, suddenly unsure where to begin. A storm can blow for hours and still feel like it started only a minute ago, and memory behaves the same way. Fresh as first grief, though it belongs to another decade entirely. I saw 1990 not as a number but as a corridor, the medical office at the shipyard, stale coffee and fluorescent light. The doctor looking at his shoes before he looked at me. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale. Caleb's name moved through that office like a door that would not open again. Lucas was 9 and had a cowlick that refused to behave. Bills arrived with the indifference of traffic. Work multiplied and I let it. By day I learned the tight official rhythms of a community college registrar's desk files, in forms stamped students asking the same questions with different accents of urgency. At night I took shifts in the laundry room of a hotel off Meeting Street, feeding industrial washers that never slept. Lucas did homework at a sideways metal table, legs swinging paper smudged with lint dust. I memorized the route between the two jobs as if it were a prayer. Years hopscotched. Summer ran out of breath. Lucas grew into suits I could not afford but somehow produced. When Duke accepted him for their MBA, I emptied a retirement account I'd started the year our gas heater failed, and we spent a February baking casseroles to keep the kitchen warm. The clerk said, "Are you sure?" The pen said yes. I thought I would go back one day, finish the master's in history that lived in a folder under my bed. But some dreams are like quilts you fold and place on a shelf you can't reach without a ladder. You keep them anyway. Serena arrived with blazers the color of pewter and a vocabulary of soft commands. Boundaries, she said, the way people say patience or posture. Just text before you drop by, Miriam, she told me in a tone that assumed compliance. Lucas echoed her neat scheduling. Weekends were divided like slices. Even bedtime stories came with a curated rotation. When I laughed at the idea of order-solving everything, Lucas tilted his head in that way he had adopted from the people he wanted to impress. It's not about control, Mom. It's about stability. It moved in small inches. The grandchildren wouldn't sleep over without a sign-off because routines mattered, and I was flexible in ways that sound affectionate until they aren't. He started noticing my receipts as if numbers confessed sins words might dodge. You don't have to buy brand name anything, he said, holding a crumpled slip for cereal in the same flavor he begged for when we lived on 2 paychecks and the uncashed coin jar. I swallowed explanations that would sound like whining on his side of the table. I bought a navy blue ledger from the stationery store on King Street and wrote down what I paid and when. Not because I needed proof to make it real every dollar left a mark, but because I understood now that other people trust paper more than they trust the truth of a woman's memory. The memo sat open at the top of my screen, a small gray rectangle carrying more weight than it deserved. I played it once more, not to injure myself with the same words, but to learn the sound of them the way a seamstress runs a finger along a tear to understand how to mend it. She won't feel a thing. He's always hated scenes. He forgets that silence can be a scene just as loud as a slammed door. I moved through the room and gathered what belonged to me, because I said so, the deed folder, a birth certificate that had yellowed at the edges, Caleb's handwritten recipe for cornbread that we never quite got right after he was gone. The ledger went in first. A worn photograph followed Lucas on Folly Beach at 8, hair salted flat by wind, his hand in mine, our feet sunk in a cold stripe of surf. I let my thumb rest against the grainy paper, then slipped it back into its envelope. On the dresser, a small square box held the necklace Caleb had clasped at my throat the last Christmas we were still 3. I lifted it free and the chain made a sound, like a whisper, that knows better than to become a word. The room changed with each action as if air rearranged itself. I took the spare toothbrush, 2 changes of clothes that could be washed in a sink if they had to be, and the envelope of documents I didn't want misplaced under a pile of mail. I didn't make lists. Lists can be argued with. I made choices. The coach loft absorbed them the way old spaces do, quietly, with a kind of steadiness I had once mistaken for consent. Somewhere outside, a car hissed past the mouth of the alley, tires feathering the wet. The rain gave up its tantrum and settled into weather. I turned the dial on the lamp to darkness and stood for a moment in the quiet I used to think was loneliness. The suitcase sat by the door zipper, mouth closed, waiting not for permission but for a hand on its handle. On the shelf, the porcelain bowl looked better without the extra key lighter, as if it had been relieved of an obligation it never asked for. In the window, the water on the glass thinned to long threads, and then to nothing. I laid my palm flat against the cool door, just to feel the wood know I was still here. When the blinds took on that shy paleness that means morning is not far, I rolled my shoulders and listened to my body do its ordinary work. Heartbeat, breath, the old right knee bargaining with the day. I neither hurried nor stalled. The decision had already been made in the moment the key slid into the drawer. Everything else was follow-through. I lifted the suitcase and set it square beside the door, the handle folded down, the weight honest in my hand. The sky lightened, the chimes in the alley gave a single small answer to a breeze. I picked up the ledger once more, opened it to the first clean page, and wrote the date. Then I closed the book and slid it back into the suitcase where it belonged. Morning arrived in a color the forecast never names, a thinned pearl at the edge of the blinds, the kind of light that admits it has not slept much either. I lifted the suitcase by its side, handle, felt the honest drag in my shoulder, and eased the door shut behind me. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon oil and damp brick. On the landing, I waited a breath to hear the tumbler settle. The key I kept, the only one left on my ring, clicked once. No more spares and bowls for other people's convenience. The rain had cleaned the alley so thoroughly the air felt new. Leaves flashed a wet green as if the palmettos had been lacquered overnight. A rideshare idled at the curb, the driver wordless in a baseball cap, radio, tuned to light jazz that sounded like someone smoothing a tablecloth. I watched the streets unspool, King to Broad, to Rutledge, familiar blocks seen from the indifferent angle of a passenger. Charleston does not pretend at anonymity. It shows you its ironwork and asks if you remember names to go with the scrolls. I did. I let them pass. The driver dropped me near the Ashley River at a low motel whose sign had been repainted too many times to hold a single shade of blue. Its doorways faced outward like a row of stubborn eyelids. I chose it precisely because no one I knew would think to look there, plain, honest, forgettable. The room was clean in the way of rooms that have been scrubbed more often than they have been cherished. A square table. 2 chairs impossible to mistake for comfortable. A bedspread in a geometry of brown and gold that told itself it would not show stains. I placed the suitcase on its metal stand, clicked it open, and lifted out the folder I'd wedged between shirts. The ledger lay on top. I set it on the table and wrote a line, checked in room 112. Key in hand, noon quiet as if someone has drawn a circle around it. The writing steadied me more than the room did. I did not unpack much, 2 changes, the envelope with vital papers, the box with Caleb's chain. The rest stayed put. I washed my face in the basin and saw in the mirror a woman whose expression had misplaced its softness and did not mind the absence. The motel's ice machine coughed in the hallway. Somewhere a gull insisted on its opinion of the river. I slipped the folder into my tote and went to find what needed finding. The credit union I chose sat in a brick building that pretended to be a house, white columns attempting comfort. A manager named Ms. Tran on her badge hair, tugged back in an admirably stern bun, listened without flinching as I explained what I wanted and what I would not tolerate. Her keyboard made the conversation sound industrious. "I'll open a personal checking and savings in your name only," she said, confirming each point as if we were laying tile. "New card, new online profile, no linked payees at the start. The joint account stays," I said, "for the moment." She nodded once, not in agreement so much as in acknowledgement, and turned the screen for me to review the addresses and spellings and the ordinary data we treat like an introduction nowadays. She did not ask why a woman my age would choose to strand herself financially in the middle of a week. She did not care enough to be cruel. She cared enough to be precise. When we were done, she slid a folder across to me and tapped the paper clips that held it neat. "If you think of anything else," she said, "you will call and you will say my name at the desk." Outside, the air had warmed, the river smell in it now. Salt that remembered distance. I walked to Broad Street because years at a desk had not trained me out of believing answers lay there. The law office I had in mind occupied a second floor above a stationery shop, an arrangement that felt fitting to me. Names on the door, Mendez and Lyle Estate and Elder Law. The waiting room offered the particular quiet of rooms that prefer to hear facts before feelings. No magazines, just a carafe of water and cups that made the act of pouring look ceremonial. Alina Mendez greeted me with sleeves pushed up and a legal pad already waiting. She had the kind of face I trusted for its plainness, no efforts toward performance, no matronly pity. I told her what the paper already knew, the deed that put the coach loft in my name alone, the years I had spent sidestepping the idea of updating a will because my hands were always full of other tasks. I told her about the document Lucas had insisted I sign when his own life grew busy enough to make mine look like a resource-durable power of attorney in case of emergency. I didn't have to explain that emergencies can be staged. Ms. Mendez wrote without interrupting. When she did speak, it was to point, not to wonder. "We will revoke the POA. We will draft a new will. And between those we will build a wall and inter vivos trust for the property, the kind with bricks you cannot see through." She said bricks without a smile. I signed revocation papers first. The notary, a woman with a voice that sounded like good gravel, applied her seal with the finality of a ship's stamp. The next set required more conversation. Who would stand in my place if I could not? Who held both caution and spine? "Health decisions," she asked. "Janine Porter," I said, surprised at how quickly the name arrived. Janine had shared my corner of the registrar's office for longer than either of us admitted was possible. She ordered her life as carefully as she ordered her pens. She would not let a nurse talk over me where I could not object. "And for the trust successor trustee, my cousin Ruth," I said. "Beaufort, she has more sense than the rest of us combined. She won't be cowed by a letterhead." Ms. Mendez nodded, spun the pad, and let the pen wait where my signature should go. I signed in the slow hand of someone who knows a pen is a tool and not a wand. By the time I stood, I had a stack that felt heavier than its pages, revocation of the old powers draft, of the trust to which I would deed the coach, loft a new HIPAA authorization, the scaffold of a will that did not leave room for doubt. Alina gave me a card and an instruction. "Keep these with you for now. Sometimes that's the only safe place." It was early afternoon. The light in the street knew how to mind its business. I returned to the motel on foot to see what the walk would take out of me. A bus sighed at a corner. A boy kicked a crushed bottle cap down the gutter as if he were sending it home. I bought a ham biscuit from a counter whose menu had been the same since 1979 and ate it sitting under a live oak. Salt and fat are honest comforts, and I took them without apology. Back in the room, I spread the stack on the square table and sorted it with the cheap kind of dignity a motel can grant if you insist. The ledger opened to the page I'd started that morning, and I drew a line beneath it. Revoked POA filed. New accounts open. Trust drafted. I paused before writing the next words, but my hand made them anyway. That copy key is no one's problem now. The phone rang as I capped the pen, a number I didn't recognize. The voice belonged to Ms. Tran, tempered now by a trace of something I could not name. "Ms. Hale, she said I wanted to alert you that your daughter-in-law, Serena Hale, visited a branch last week to inquire about adding herself as a payable-on-death beneficiary to your joint account. We declined to take any action without you. I thought you would want to know." I thanked her in a tone I used to keep for students who brought me a problem before it turned to a mess. After we hung up, I let the room return to its small electronics and the distant thrum of the river road. The information did not surprise me. It lined up the way receipts line up when you force them into chronological order and see the habits they are too shy to call patterns. I added a note to the ledger POA used as leverage attempted POD inquiry by S record date, a line that was all, not a verdict. The book was not for pronouncements, it was for facts. The day arranged itself into a usable rhythm. Morning was for offices, afternoon for the slow work of removing invisible threads other hands had tied. I sat at the desk with my laptop and slid an online banking screen into existence. The list of active payees and transfers scrolled down longer than I liked. A mortgage payment to a bank in Raleigh I had never personally walked into. A line item for a club membership Lucas must have sworn gave him an edge with clients, the kind of utilities that make themselves look harmless by using lowercase letters. One by one I clicked cancel, waited for the small confirmation box, typed the staccato spells the bank required. Stop, confirm yes, and watch the agreements release like knots you pick free with a pin. Janine answered on the second ring when I called in the late afternoon. I heard the rattle of her beaded bracelet through the line like a memory. I'm going to send you a document to sign, I told her, and explained the shape of it without giving the situation permission to become gossip. It means if I cannot say yes or no to a treatment, you will say it on my behalf. Then you should know, she said quietly, that I'm constitutionally unable to say yes or no without reading every option twice. That I said is exactly why I'm asking you. We did not say Lucas's name. We had eaten too many lunches together to waste time on bad flavors. When we hung up, I wrote her name into the margin where Health Proxy had waited and felt the paper behave as if it had been wanting that particular ink. I let the evening come without hurrying it. I bought a plastic bowl of strawberries from the gas station at the corner and washed them under the tap until they surrendered their stubborn white dust. I ate them standing at the window and watched a cargo ship move upriver as if it were being pulled by string. People on its deck moved like punctuation in a sentence too long for a breath. When the ship sounded its horn, the room answered with its own small bodies. The air conditioner startled awake, the bed frame clicked. I had managed without planning to a day in which I acted more than I reacted. I left the lamp on low and pulled the photographs from an envelope that had been taped shut and opened too many times. Folly Beach. Lucas 8. Our jeans wet halfway to the knees. Caleb in a sweater he'd been too proud to donate even when it had frayed. There are families whose pictures are candids of laughter. Ours were often portraits of standing our ground. I laid the beach picture at the top of the stack. It was an anchor without needing to be heavy. Sleep was not dramatic. It came like a reasonable suggestion. I let it. The next morning I returned to Broad Street with the steadiness of a woman who knows she can find the same office twice. Alina had printed the trust in its near final form. The language described the coach loft as if it were a ship to be registered, measured not by how it looked, but by what could be tied to it. The Harleston Coach Loft Trust impressed me with its own seriousness. We flagged a few lines to revise who could access records and when, how distributions would require 2 signatures where one invited mischief. I initialed margins until the act felt like a quiet alphabet I had been rehearsing. Would you like me to record the deed once you sign? Alina asked. Yes, I said. I'd like the county to know what I know. She smiled not in approval but in satisfaction at a job that would be done properly. And the will, she said, we will finalize after you read one more draft. No need to rush that detail until you like every comma. I stopped on the stairs between floors, breath held around a thought. To move my house into a trust felt like admitting it might need protection from the very people to whom, according to commercials and plaques and carefully worded holidays, we belong. The thought did not make me sad. It made me alert. Near lunchtime, the credit union called again. Not Ms. Tran, but one of her officers, a man whose tone suggested his tie was too tight, even over the phone. He wanted to confirm that I, not anyone else, had canceled the automatic payments to the Raleigh mortgage. I confirmed. He recited the standard paragraph about processing windows and settlement dates, and what might still slip through the pipes like a marble you drop down a drain just before bedtime. I wrote down the dates and the reference numbers, then wrote marble and drain in the margin, because metaphors keep administrators human even when policies do not. On my walk back, heat laid its palm on the crown of my head and kept it there. I cut through a park whose grass scissored at my ankles. Under an oak, a woman tried to get a toddler to accept the shape of a nap. He had not hired her as his manager and did not see why he should follow her schedule. He ran in a circle with the furious joy of someone who has discovered both the circumference and the sprint. I let the sight sit inside me like a careful joke. The motel door stuck when I returned the humidity doing battle with paint. I leaned my shoulder into it and felt it give like a friend who forgives you for ringing without texting first. I sat. I drank water. I folded the chain back into its square box and counted to 50 in my head until the habit returned that tells a person she can wait for answers without scraping at them with her nails. The call from Serena arrived late afternoon, the number unfamiliar enough to make me consider silence. I pressed accept because cowardice has many disguises and not now is one of them. Her voice was a grade lower than I remembered, sanded down. "Miriam," she said, dispensing with the formalities she preserves for other people's mothers. "Please don't hang up. There are things I should have asked sooner." "You have the floor," I said. I believed Lucas, she said in a rush, that made me imagine her standing between a kitchen island and a door. "About the money. About you needing things." I thought I was deferring to a son who understood his family. "He told me you were impulsive with spending and that any boundary held you together. That if we didn't manage the flow, you would drown us all in obligations we didn't make." She made a small sound that might have been disgust, but with herself. "Last spring I found a receipt, city tax office, your name at the top, the amount in full. He had told me he covered it." "Did you ask him why your eyes and his story did not match," I said, "or did you decide your eyes lacked context?" "I decided wrong," she said. The words bent on the second syllable. "I am not asking you to trust me. I am telling you I am not proud of what I chose to believe. If you need proof of anything he has said to me or asked me to do, I can send it." "Send what you think you should have seen sooner," I said. "Text or email. I prefer not to discuss details over the phone." "Understood," she said. "Miriam, I'm sorry. I did not say I forgive you. Forgiveness is not a form letter." "Thank you for calling," I said, and ended the conversation before either of us could turn it into a rehearsal for something else. I placed the phone face down and looked at the tabletop as if it might tell me where courtesy ends and care begins. Then I wrote called, offered documentation, no promises made in the ledger, and underlined documentation twice for myself, not for her. I slipped a blank index card under the paperclip at the front of the folder and wrote her number there in case my phone decided to forget what I could not afford to. Evening pulled itself toward the windows, a pale thread, and I let the room find its shadows without telling them where to lie. I boiled water in the contraband kettle I kept for tea. The motel's coffee maker could turn water to tar, but it could not be trusted with anything delicate. When the tea steeped, it colored the cup the way honest liquids do, slowly, thoroughly, without theatrics. I drank and read the draft trust one more time, as if it were a map of a country I intended to walk. The sections on power made sense to me now in my body in a way they had not, when I'd read them as abstractions who can sign when you cannot, who must be present, who must keep quiet unless asked to speak. Near 9, an email landed with the subdued bell that all motel rooms copy from one another. Serena's name in the line looked smaller than it did in person. The message itself was not an apology with padding. It was a forward of a thread with Lucas where the tone adopted that efficient intimacy I'd heard in the memo. "She'll take care of the gap like always. If we carry it a few more months, the line will clear. Let her feel helpful, it's less messy that way." There were attachments, screenshots of calendar reminders that referenced Miriam's account as if it were a faucet. I did not make a sound. I saved the email to a folder I labeled with the unromantic name Records Outside. I printed nothing. Paper can betray you by insisting on his own vulnerability to loss. I placed the phone to the side and sat. No television. The motel offered a menu of shows that all involved people choosing impossible versions of themselves on stages lit like operating rooms. I chose the night instead. From the window, the river lift bridge showed its bones a geometry that made sense whether or not anyone admired it. Cars stitched across in steady rows, each a small promise to be where it said it was going. I slept because the body requires the mercy the mind sometimes forgets to request. The next day held fewer errands and more consolidations, the work of sealing the seams so you do not bleed through the fabric. I called the county office and asked about the title once the deed moved into the trust. The clerk recited the steps so by rote I wanted to send her a gift for being the fragile human maintaining the machine. I stood in a line at the post office to request certified copies of documents that would need stomping by strangers at desks. I wrote a letter by hand to Ruth in Beaufort. "Dear Ruth, I need your practicality attached to my signature," and dropped it in the slot, with the odd gratitude you keep for heavily painted metal. At noon, I sat on a bench with a turkey sandwich I made from grocery store parts. The mustard escaped the bread in an enthusiastic argument with gravity, and I laughed out loud alone but not lonely. 2 students with laptop bags pushed laughter around to each other like a ball and did not notice me. I did not require notice. I required honesty. The day gave me enough to make notes from. Back in the room, the air conditioner wheezed itself awake again, and I wrote down what I had done, not in case anyone asked, but so I could see the row of actions become a particular shape. The ledger had been a household book for me once, groceries, taxes, the cost of a winter coat that made me feel taller than I was. Now it had turned lightly into a register of autonomy. I respected it for managing the pivot without changing its linen cover. I let late afternoons settle. The room held the smell of tea and old pine cleanser and the faint sweetness strawberries leave when you have rinsed them with mild devotion. I opened the chain's box and closed it again without lifting the necklace. Not everything you own must be handled to remain yours. I put the folder in my tote and set the tote by the door because habits when they are good should be rehearsed. A breeze lifted the corner of the motel's stiff curtain and let it fall. Somewhere down the hall, a couple disagreed in murmurs about where to eat and how early to be there. The world went on doing the simple arithmetic of itself, people, plans, traffic, while I adjusted the column, labeled mine until the numbers behaved. I did not make speeches to the ceiling. I did not provide my own music. I drank water, I switched off the lamp, and I let the dark answer me, without feeling required to answer it back. By mid-morning, the room had warmed enough to make the air feel like a hand on my shoulder. I had just finished noting a line in the ledger title office, confirmed fee schedule, when the phone vibrated and dragged the table's thin wood toward its hum. A text from Lucas Noon, Blackfinch Cafe, King Street. Bring whatever you've signed. It read like a calendar invitation that mistook itself for authority. I messaged Janine, meeting L at noon in public place. I'd like a witness. She replied with a single word, coming. I slipped the recorder into my tote, checked its red light, and touched the folder's clip one more time, the way you check a door you know you locked. Blackfinch kept its front door propped with a chair, whose paint had surrendered in honest chips. Inside, a line of students dragging Friday through them, a glass case of pastries, either too glossy or not glossy enough, steam shouldering out from a military row of espresso machines. I chose a table by the window because glass keeps a record of posture. Janine arrived in a navy cardigan and placed her tote at her feet as if taking root. I felt the recorder humming in the bag beside my knee, like a very small, very calm heart. Lucas walked in a minute past noon gaze, already rehearsed for impatience. Serena stood half a step behind him in a blazer the color of new asphalt. He did not ask if we wanted coffee or air or the weather. He pulled out a chair with a scrape that made a student turn. We are going to stop whatever you're doing, he said. This, he flattened his palm above the folder, needs to end before it causes any more issues at the bank. I slid the folder to the center. Not a gesture of surrender, but of clarity. Read, I said. Start with the first page. The embossed cover sheet showed its own stiffness, the Harleston Coach Loft Trust. He shuffled to the signature page because impatience teaches a person to look for the part with their name. He didn't find it. He found mine and Alina's and Ruth's and the notary's seal. He flipped backward to the property description, meets and bounds as dry as a courtroom's throat. He read Ruth's role as successor trustee, Janine's name in the healthcare proxy, in a separate packet, the revocation of the old power of attorney, the line that stated beneficiaries of accounts would not be altered without my explicit consent. This is ridiculous, he said. He kept his voice low at first, a man attempting poise. You don't understand what you're setting in motion. I understand the motion, I said. It is mine. Serena's eyes found the corner of the table and held it as if it could offer advice. Janine folded her hands and did not blink. Lucas's volume rose a degree the way a stovetop flame lifts when it finds more gas. You are creating problems that don't need to exist. The refinancing is not your concern, I said. Nor is my home, nor are my accounts. You're being dramatic, he said, louder now enough for the espresso machine barista to angle her head. This is exactly what I meant when I said you insert yourself. You make everything about you. You embarrass me in front of people who actually matter. He gave the word embarrass a hard middle as if it carried weight. I let it land without granting it a chair. You'll return the spare key, he said, and you'll sign a management authorization so we can— No, I said. He stared at me as if the syllable wore sequins. Excuse me? No, I said again the second time softer, because the first had done the work. He laughed. It was a sound I had not heard from him in years, boyishness hardened into disdain. You think a stack of paper protects you. You have always needed me to make sense of things, Mom. Janine's head turned at Mom. Serena's hand tightened around the rim of a coffee cup that wasn't hers. You are not the sense, I said. You are my son. Something in his face stopped, then reconfigured itself into something he thought would sell better. You won't see the kids if you keep this up, he said too quickly. Threats are admissions, Janine murmured, audible enough to count. He snapped toward her. Who are you? The person who will speak for her when she cannot, Janine said as plainly as a doorframe. Lucas's mouth thinned. The cafe's noise continued, steam spoons, the little chorus of young laughter that believes itself private. He put his hands on the folder as if pressure might teach it to obey. You're being pathetic, he said, not shouting, but not hiding. Always clinging, always trying to make yourself the axis. This is humiliating. The words arranged themselves beside the ones from the memo, a neat column in my mind. I felt something like coolness move along my neck, the body's version of a lining paper. "You will leave her alone now," Janine said, not asking. He stood so fast the chair legs chirped against tile. A couple at the next table looked up with the kind of curiosity that makes stories travel. Serena rose more slowly, her knuckles pale. Lucas gathered the folder's edges with a practiced motion that had convinced many documents to cooperate. This one did not. I rested my palm on the top and brought it back to my side of the table. "Those are mine," I said, "and now you've read them." He stared one heartbeat longer than his schedule allows. Then he pushed away and left through the open door so hard, the chair that held it rattled and settled like a scolded pet. Serena remained standing, eyes flicking between us, then lowered them and followed. The cafe absorbed the exit the way rooms do when they have seen noise before. Janine placed a napkin on the folder as if to bless it and said, "We're done here." I stopped the recorder and watched the small red light surrender to black. Alina listened to the audio that afternoon with her pen poised above a legal pad that had already earned its lines. She did not make a show of outrage. Her eyebrows climbed once, then resettled as if finding a better shelf. "Good," she said when it ended. "That is useful." We sent letters by certified mail before 3 o'clock, quiet papers, wearing bright green slips like sensible vests. One addressed to Lucas noticed that the coach loft sat within a trust and entry without permission would constitute trespass under the relevant code. One to Serena factual in its language, noting that beneficiary changes required my presence and that any attempt to solicit them would be reported. Alina's clerk affixed receipts with a Staples unceremonious bite. I watched each envelope disappear into the slot and did not feel theatrical, just accurate. At the credit union the next morning, Ms. Tran met my eyes with a steadiness that read as respect. "We've flagged the joint account for manual review on any outgoing attempt above a minimal threshold," she said. "If there is a movement that fails the pattern, we call you before we push any button." "Thank you," I said. "We also logged yesterday's inquiry from a device we have on file for Mr. Hale," she added, her voice still even. "Transfer attempt declined. Beneficiary edit declined. Our notes include the certified letters you mailed." Back in room 112, I recorded the times and amounts in the ledger with a neatness that would have made Caleb smile. I did not enlarge the numbers with adjectives. Their shapes were enough. I added the certified mail receipts behind the ledger's back cover, then reread the trespass notice until the language felt like a door I could close without effort. That evening, I assembled a packet addressed to my siblings and cousins in the Low Country, not a manifesto, not a plea. The cover sheet held 4 sentences enclosed are records of taxes paid on the Harleston property account statements related to recent transfers canceled at my request and the recorded revocation of a prior power of attorney. I'm sharing these for accuracy. Behind it, copies of receipts, the page from the trust that described the property, a short transcript excerpted from the cafe audio where my name met the word pathetic in a way that made the rest of the line unnecessary. I wrote, "For your files" at the bottom and left it at that. The packets went into thick envelopes, the kind clerks like because they survive machines. I addressed them in my careful registrar's hand and watched them leave my own. Near dusk, an email from Serena found the motel's weak Wi-Fi and clicked itself into place. No subject line, no salutation. A forwarded exchange, Lucas writing last winter. "She'll cover the gap like always. Let her feel helpful, it's less messy that way." Another message from him 2 months ago. "We carry the condo dues 1 more quarter. I'll get the bank to pull it quietly." The thread did not require commentary. It carried its own tone like a stain. I created a folder on the laptop named, with the neutrality I trusted, Records External. I slid the emails into it and made a second copy on a drive no one else knew existed. I wrote 1 line in the ledger email from S. Ree, less messy and dues. Saved twice. I capped the pen. Janine called after dinner. "I like your lawyer," she said. I could hear the bead bracelet again, her habit when she thinks. "I also like the sound of your voice when you told him no." "I liked how short the word is," I said. "We underestimate short things," she said. "They get a lot done." We let the call rest where it wanted. I set the phone down and stood by the window while the river bridge lit itself 1 bone at a time. A boy on a bicycle cut the parking lot into territories and claimed them with his back wheel. The motel's ice machine coughed up another offering to the corridor. Small noises, honest ones working on their own schedule. Before I slept, I took the folder out once more and checked what I knew with my hands. The trust, the revocation, the letters, green receipts, the ledger which had changed voice without changing paper. From the bottom of the stack, I lifted the Folly Beach photograph and looked at the boy standing at my side with his hair salted down. That day had been windy and cold and simple. None of those things had ruined it. I slid the picture back into its envelope, set the folder inside the tote, and placed the tote by the door. In the morning, a clerk at the county office stamped the deed transfer with a good, unapologetic thunk. At the credit union, Ms. Tran's assistant confirmed the alerts were live. I walked to the post office and checked the tracking on the certified letters. The screen blinked in transit where I could see it. I bought a sheet of stamps with pelicans that looked mildly surprised to be enlisted. Around noon, the phone rang with a number that started with Raleigh. A fraud officer wanted to confirm that an attempt at a transfer had been made from a browser that did not match my usual locations. Decline, I said. He asked me to verify the last 3 legitimate transactions. I recited them, and he thanked me with the professional relief of a man who just found the correct file. I returned to the motel with a grocery bag, bread, cheese, strawberries, not yet willing to admit their ripeness. The room lowered itself around me, the way decent rooms do, no flattery, no judgment. I ate, I drank water, I rinsed the strawberries again just to have something patient to do. Then I opened the ledger and wrote the last line of the day before the ink could lose its nerve. Bank calls documented. Letters tracked, audio archived, paper holds. I closed the book and listened as the air conditioner struck its match and carried the flame. The tote sat against the wall, the folder within it like a weight that does not injure because it is earned. The afternoon leaned on the window. I let it. By morning, the certified slips in my wallet had creased themselves into obedience. I laid them beside the ledger, wrote the date, and underlined it once. The room had the particular hush of days that know what they're for. I took the tote, locked the door, and let the corridor's thin carpet carry me forward. Alina's office smelled faintly of paper warmed by lamps. She had arranged the documents in a careful fan trust, final form, pour-over will, healthcare directives, a tidy letter of instruction that told the next person where to look without dramatics. We read each page aloud the way people read recipes they've already memorized precisely out of respect. When it came time to sign, the notary uncapped her stamp with the concentration of someone setting a cornerstone. Ink pressure lift. The pages accepted their new names without argument. For the will's specific bequests, Alina said, tapping the paragraph that mattered, still your choice. Yes. A handful of small things that carried use without noise. A set of silver spoons my mother said were good for soup. The quilt that had watched every winter I can remember. Caleb's pocket knife that could open a stubborn letter or a summer peach. The coach loft itself sat already inside the trust, its remainder directed where it would sit and mean shelter and endowment at a low country refuge for people who needed a room that locked and a door that would be theirs when they turned the knob. Names matter to clerks, rooms matter to bodies. We filed what needed filing. Alina shook my hand the way colleagues do at the end of a project properly executed. Keep the originals close, she said, and live your day. The motel key slid across the laminate when I turned it in. The clerk looked up with the half-interest of someone counting a drawer and nodded. I left with my tote lighter by a single rectangle of plastic and heavier by everything that had been made exact. The air outside had brightened to the kind of heat that smells like river and rope. I did not go back to the coach loft to measure what I already knew by heart. Ruth met me at a small rental on the marsh edge that looked as if it had been built to watch tides without commentary. 1 room for sleeping, 1 for living, a galley kitchen that respected ingredients by giving them a clean counter. The balcony could hold 2 chairs without forcing them to knock knees. We stood and the marsh did what marshes do, lifted and lowered according to a logic older than our errands. This suits you, Ruth said, and handed me a small brown paper bag. Inside a bundle of rosemary with dirt still around its roots. It will earn its keep, I said. We carried in the small things that make a day behave: a kettle, 2 plates, the ledger, the chain in its square box. The photographs stayed in their envelope until the walls learned my name. Ruth tightened a loose screw on the balcony door with Caleb's pocket knife, then slid the knife back across the table to me, blade folded, purpose intact. When she left the room, realized it was mine and adjusted itself accordingly. In the afternoon, I checked the tracking numbers. Delivered. My cousins would open packets that did not accuse. They would see dates lined into columns and make their own conclusions. At the credit union, Ms. Tran called with a last confirmation that the flags were catching what they should and letting go of what they ought to. Your profile reads as yours again, she said. It was an odd sentence and exactly right. Serena sent one more message, brief, unadorned. I've returned my copy of the spare key. Slid it under your door yesterday, for what it's worth. I did not respond. The key was not under my door. It was under a door that no longer counted as hers. That was enough sentence for any day. Near evening, Janine arrived with a grocery bag and the settled cheer of someone who knows the correct number of onions for a pan. We ate on the balcony with our knees under the same small table, the rosemary in a pot between us, beginning to consider the idea of standing up. The wind brought river salt and the faint judgment of gulls. Janine ran 1 finger along the pot rim and said nothing. It was an eloquence I understood. After she left, I washed 2 plates and set them upside down to dry. The apartment's single key sat on the counter, bright as a coin. I removed the others from my ring duplicates for mailboxes' doors. I would not open again a key whose teeth I could identify by memory but no longer needed. The ring made a new sound when I lifted it, lighter, declarative. I slid the single key on and turned the rest into a small bundle for the drawer. Not a ceremony, a fact. Night drew its thin line across the marsh. The bridge threw a chain of light east to west. Cars stitched themselves across like steady handwriting. I opened the ledger and wrote, not a speech, not a summary. Trust recorded. Will executed. Residence established. Keys returned to their correct number. The period at the end of the line looked precise rather than heavy. I set the book in the drawer beside the spoon set and closed it. The air held a coolness that made the rosemary raise its small, brave smell. I stepped onto the balcony and leaned my forearms on the rail until the wood agreed we were on the same side. A barge moved beyond the last curve of the river, a square of work with lights honest about their color. When it sounded its horn, the room behind me answered with the faint click of the air conditioner, thinking about its options and choosing one. I locked the door once, then did not check it again. The key settled on its hook. The marsh lifted, lowered, lifted. I turned off the lamp and let the dark fit itself to the room I had chosen. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.